Joaquin Cole, and today, first of all, good afternoon, but today I'm going to be highlighting a very important poem called Motives and Thoughts. Alright, so firstly I want to talk about the artist and the person, orator behind this poem. Her name is Lauryn Hill. So she's actually one of the most influential R&B artists, arguably, in history. She's known for working with the Fugees. She's also an actor. She's in a couple movies. Sister Act is one of them. And additionally, she's most famous for her album called The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. So firstly, the purpose of this poem highlights Lauryn Hill really wants to emphasize and expose the distortions and realities of life. A lot of propaganda, a lot of misconceptions that the media influences for people to be able to interpret life through. So she really wants to make sure that people are aware of these and really challenges them to really introspect, meditate, and think about their motives and thoughts to see if they're really in alignment with their values or through the propaganda and influence of the human condition. So firstly, I want to talk about the three main points that Lauryn Hill really talks about in this poem specifically. One of them is going to be the underlying havoc and the calamities that society portrays. So these are things like war, these are things like greed, hedonism, pleasure, egocentrism, and etc. Additionally, the second point she really wants to highlight is the hegemonic manipulation that a lot of leaders have onto society. So these can be things to, again, promote hegemony as well as just kind of promote their power and dominance in leadership. Lastly, she really wants to highlight how civilization is able to suffice or succumb to conformity and groupthink, not really having their own autonomous thoughts and ideologies, rather they're conforming and really thinking in this herd mentality. So firstly, in the papers I've given you, I want you guys to look at that first stanza, and that's essentially going to really highlight what Hill does to kind of expose this reality. She paints a picture of like this kind of dehumanizing kind of society in a very dystopian manner. So just to reiterate the first stanza, saying rotating bodies, confusion of sound, negative imagery holding us down. So here again, she's really painting this picture through very articulate metaphors and different things, highlighting this calamity, this confusion, this chaos in society. This also ties in directly with what was happening in society in the early 2000s. This was a time of a lot of chaos and catastrophe. As 9/11 just occurred, there was also a lot of issues with war. The Afghanistan war was starting to emerge and other different things like that. There's also a lot of polarization amongst politics. So specifically, George W. Bush's election, people were arguing and having a lot of polarization and controversy with tinkering in Florida's specific voting areas. So a lot of things were happening in society that was sparking a lot of controversy and distraction. Transitioning to kind of Brooks' pentat in here, this is a very unique poem just because this pentat is very equivocal. You can look at it through different ways and you can interpret it differently as well. So one way you're able to look at it is through kind of the agent of being a manipulative leader. So if you look at it through a manipulative leader's agency, you see that the act here is going to be deception, hegemony, corruption. The scene is going to be focusing on war, propaganda, distortions, distractions, and chaos. The agents are going to be these manipulative leaders, and then the agency is going to be the propaganda, the media control, these false prophets that are all portrayed through the media. Lastly, the purpose is to, again, maintain that dominance, power, and control over the manipulation of the human condition. Again, this is on the second page of your handout. But then, if we look at it through a different perspective, next slide please, you can also see that they have us, the individual, the audience, being the agent in this kind of area. So, if you look at it through that perspective, the act is going to actually transition to conformity and ignorance. The scene is going to focus on a plethora and abundance of events and distractions that are distorting your attention. The audience is going to be the agent, so we have the autonomy to really decide what we're doing. The agency is going to be critical thinking, discernment, vigilance, and then lastly, liberty, agency, and enlightenment is going to be our purpose. This is going to be something also that Lauryn Hill likes to tie into. She has a lot of anecdotes and narratives that she likes to select. So firstly, she has a very philosophical one, and this is going to be actually originating from Plato, the allegory of the cave. And essentially, in this allegory, Plato describes it as prisoners that are stuck in a cave. There's chains in the cave, and they're facing a wall. This wall has a lot of reflections of society and different things that are occurring. However, these things are false. They're not the reality of what's actually going on because they're inside a cave. However, there's an exit and there's an opening to the cave. One of these prisoners is able to actually disappear and get outside out of the cave through this ascent to the sunlight. And once they're doing that, they're exposed of realities and what is actually happening in society. And that is something that really excites him, and he gets motivated to tell the following prisoners. However, he gets ostracized, he gets persecuted in that case. And people are very uncomfortable, and they refuse to believe the realities and stay stuck in this groupthink mentality. This also is a perfect segue to the second story, which is essentially the emperor's clothes. And in the emperor's clothes, this is essentially going to be another kind of folklore or an anecdote that highlights an emperor that's very vain, very supercilious, that focuses on kind of materialistic things, specifically what he's wearing in clothes. There are these two common that come in and try to, I guess, sell him some clothes that are not existent. Him being gullible enough to be able to fall for that, he actually ends up buying the clothes that are non-existent. They claim that the clothes are invisible. So in reality, when he wears the clothes, he's wearing nothing. He's naked. And he actually goes out and presents naked. Everyone looks at them and realizes that he's naked, however, they still kind of conform and act like he's wearing clothes. These are all tying into how society has these indoctrinations of you to believe one thing in reality that's very far from the truth. Lastly, Hill has a specific call to action. If you look into your script specifically, all in the bolded parts on the first page, they highlight how you need to check your motives and thoughts. She says that 3 times, I believe. And when she mentions that, she's really calling the audience to action to really see if their motives and thoughts and motivations are in alignment with who they actually are. They want to determine if what you're thinking is really due to how you think and they align with your values, or are you really just essentially conforming and being this groupthink phenomenon into what reality is really trying to portray just because of this propaganda of hedonism and hegemony and etc. to be able to kind of stay in this kind of complacent manner. Additionally, this is very similar to how Frederick Douglass in the 4th of July poem tried to have students speak in the second person, having them become aware of realizing what is happening. So Lauryn Hill is speaking to all of us, the audience, to check our motives and thoughts and seeing how the reality of them is. Next slide. Lastly, essentially what I'm trying to tell this audience is to check your motives and thoughts. Thank you so much.